Good morning, everybody, and welcome to the Daily Energy Markets podcast. It is 10:30 a.m. in the United Arab Emirates. It's very early somewhere else or very late, depending where in the world you are. But wherever you are, thank you for joining us. Brent crude oil this morning is trading down about 0.5%, just keeping its nose below the barnacle on a rock, $65 on Brent, and just above on WTI, above $60 on WTI. So that we're still locked in that 60 to 65, WTI close to 60, and Brent closer to 65. Let's go straight to America this evening, to Brian Pieri, founder of Energy Rogue. And let's be a little bit roguish, Brian. We had the Super Bowl of summits yesterday between Donald Trump and Xi Jinping, of the two leaders of US and China. 6 months after the US, Trump declared Liberation Day trade war on China. Who's winning this war, Xi or Trump?
China. Xi is winning. When we look at the conflict or the battle between the tariffs, really started a tariff war on virtually everybody, virtually every trading partner of the United States. Nobody was nobody could stay out of that, even Canada, which was a surprise to a lot of people. But I would say that China and Xi expressed some of their strength with the commerce because they purchased a lot of soybeans from the United States, which actually impacted a lot of farmers in the United States, as well
They were
as
quite strategic with that. That was very smart,
oh,
knowing that
yes.
the base of the MAGA base would be kicking him in the shins.
Well, and if you actually trace it back, they were ahead of the game because in Q4 they were China was taking actually LNG as well as some products from the United States and halted most of those actually before Trump was inaugurated. So China was actually ready for this and has been one step ahead of the game the entire way. That's my opinion from the inside looking out. Of course, there may be some concessions, but from my view,
Is that view, Brian, reflected in the wider sort of noise of America? We're seeing a recent poll that Trump's favorabilities on he's underwater like 60% on economic favorability in the polling,
I
lowest
would say,
ever in his 10 years in the political front.
yeah, I would say across the board polls are always very unreliable, but I would say from the sentiment, regardless of political spectrum, the economy in the United States is not incredibly healthy. From the outside looking in, you can look at the S&P 500, the Nasdaq, and you can draw conclusions there, but those are concentrated in very large capital countries and not the average citizen. So when you look at the average citizen, economic times are hard because prices are way up, partially because of the tariffs and trade wars. Mostly, in my opinion. But when you look at all the economics, it's harder for the average citizen. And so, regardless whether somebody leans to the right end of the spectrum or the left end of the spectrum, I think there's a resounding something needs to change on the economic policies.
Let's
So
go
that's
to
yeah.
neighboring Tehran. Daniel Rahmat, senior energy security consultant in Iran. Same question to you, Daniel. I mean, looking at things obviously from the other side of the world, from where Brian is in Colorado, you're in Tehran. This global trade war, does it feel like yesterday was a suspension of the war, or does it feel like China's winning, U.S. is winning? Your thoughts?
Hello, Sean, and hello, everybody. Um, Actually, in Iran, this was kind of reflected as a victory of China, but the main concern is it comes together with news about deliveries of huge amounts of raw material for rocket building in Iran. And apparently, Iran is very much relying on Chinese raw material for rebuilding its actually missiles arsenal, together with technology coming more or less from Russia. So Iran's main concern at this moment is not the global actually tariffs war, while it understands that as a part of the bigger actually confrontation between the East and the West, which Iran is kind of in the Eastern Front. Although it has tried to make a balance or rebuild its relations with the West, as we discussed earlier, Iran has very significantly failed to make it. So Iran is now a member of the Eastern Club, which is confronting with the West. More possibilities, more dangerous possibilities are even considered between Iranians, experts talking about possible extension of the war to Taiwan. What would China do if America stands against it in Taiwan? Or what would be the destiny of the war in Ukraine? But at the end, Iran is now still under very threatening war situation. The threat from Israel is still valid, and Iran thinks that it should keep itself ready for another round of
well, let's get to that in a second. I just want to stay a little bit focused on the news of the day coming out of China to understand where it can go next. Asif Shuja, director at Geopo Consult. Geopo Consult. I was trying to get my variety of pieces there sorted. But Asif, just looking at, if we take the view, as Brian has signaled from Colorado and Daniel from the Gulf neighborhood, that China's posture over the last 6 months of this U.S. declared trade war is in the ascendancy. China's discovering its muscle and rare earths and other things, soya beans. It strikes me that it wouldn't have a lot of incentive to be conciliatory, that it might like this trade war to continue if it is in the ascendancy. And having just spent some time in Asia myself recently, certainly the sentiment in Singapore and other places was China's winning. Your thoughts on that thesis and what it means for where it could go in the future, this particular trade face-off?
Well, thank you so much for inviting me in this podcast. I see that in the shorter run, although the sentiment is there that the China is winning, but if you look at the long-term scenario, even you go into the past, like last 25 years, China has been having a free ride in terms of everything provided by the United States, including the free trade regime. Okay. What Mr. President Donald Trump has done, he has started a new narrative which has gone to the DNA of the American populace, that it shouldn't be so. Okay, immediately if the tariffs are high, the people will have to pay. That is true. In fact, it is funny that the American public were not initially aware that they will have to pay that, right? But from the nationalist perspective, the narrative is very much there. It is embedded in the psyche of the society. So it will
indeed,
be
it seems the only
term.
thing that everybody agrees on: China bad.
Yeah, that's true. So but when it comes to war, China is a big player. In fact, much more mature than the United States in terms of the ancient civilization that China is. So its fundamental policy would be what we had, in most of the winning battles: a struggle, then truce, and then a struggle. So you have got to gear up for the next round of battle. So what you see in terms of reconciliation, that is actually a truce to prepare yourself, but it has come suddenly. China was not prepared, right? But much of the things that was happening within China right now in terms of its assertive posture was also related to Xi Jinping's, political position within the domestic realm. Okay, there is a lot of political meetings happening there. This is a time for scrutiny of the leadership, right? So CPC, these things are happening there. So that is why Mr. Xi Jinping had to position himself as a strong leader and someone who can stand in opposition to the United States in the trade war, any other challenges. So he had to be assertive, right? So this is the poster that we have seen
It's
because
given
of the
him a good
domestic compulsion.
opportunity. It's given him a good opportunity to be assertive. Without the trade war, he might be struggling to show that sort of obvious strength, if you like.
Exactly, you got it absolutely right. He has actually jumped the wagon and he has actually capitalized on the occasion. So he must as well, thank Mr. Donald Trump for that, right?
Well,
You're
maybe
right.
he'll give him an airplane or a free can of soya beans or something. Brian, looking at the fundamentals here, we're still at $60 WTI, $65 Brent. All of the noise, all this geopolitics, all this trade war, that's the number. As I say, no matter the question, the answer is always $65 Brent. Where is the challenge or that in the US from the point of view of new oil supply? We've seen the oil majors start to lay off people and the usual sort of kind of cutbacks. But has that translated to being less money in the ground in the shale patch? And what's the outlook, do you think, for US oil production after a year of $65 average on Brent?
Yeah, the outlook is very dim for economic productivity to come out of the ground at $60. It's just simply not going to happen. And you can look at the United States from an aggregate or a swarm of individual economic decisions because each decision is going to be an economic decision for each company. So you could have Chevron doing one thing, EOG doing another, and then you have independent producers doing other things. But one thing is very clear across all the producers in the United States, which is they drill their highest IRR return well first, which means every well after that is going to be a sub-economic performance, meaning if you don't have escalating prices, it means that return looks even worse. So when we contrast to 2024, when we had about $10 higher, it's just going to dwindle. I looked at the U.S. actually bumped up above 13 million barrels a day towards the end of 2023. And when we did that, we got to 13.2 million barrels a day. Our peak from late 2023 to today, our peak has been 13.6. And we've had a hard time maintaining that. So we are treading water over the course of close to multiple years now, to where we're not really growing, we're not really declining, we're just treading, because out of that 13.5, and we've talked about it before, out of that 13.5, we do have a significant decline because the vintage of the wells are so new that we decline roughly 650,000 barrels a day each month, which means we have to replace that to actually grow any. So if we grow by 10,000 barrels a day, it means we brought on 660,000 barrels a day of new production in that month. So at $60, we're not going to see anything meaningful out of, and I'll expand this to the Americas, out of Brazil, Venezuela, Guyana, Canada, or the US. I don't think we're going to see anything significant at $60. I could be surprised, but I just looked at the year-over-year numbers in all those countries. I didn't see any meaningful difference in the oil production year over year.
Daniel, speaking of oil supply, oil production, you were talking earlier a little bit about obviously Iran's continued uncertainty due to the political and the security risk in the region. Still, despite all the noise and literally the bombs we saw in June, Iran continues to export oil relatively uninterrupted. It's whatever its capacity is to export, it's more or less meeting that capacity. Where's your outlook for that intersection point going into 2026? That Trump seems to be more focused on Venezuela than Iran. The idea of Iran continuing to export the oil supply that it is.
Yeah, Sean, Iran has continued to keep a level of exports, as you know, all to China. And time to time, it's been harder or easier, depending on the situation, sanctions, policies, market fundamentals. Now Iran is not in the good shape in terms of its exports, easiness to export to Chinese markets. Now they, based on latest reports, Iranian discounts to China has reached $10 per barrel, maximum, let's say. But this is very significant comparing with June, which was $2.5 per barrel.
Sorry, just to be technically clear here, the crude oil that Iran sells to China is reduced by $10 a barrel.
Reduced
on a Brent. So it's $10 below Brent. Who wouldn't want that for their birthday?
Yeah. And normally Iranian oil is sold kind of, let's say, somehow $1 below Brent. So $10, $8 to $10 means $9 real discount to Chinese refiners, and that is a huge amount. Comparing with June, which was 2.5 up to 3.5, you can see it's a very great increase in the discounts. The reason is very obvious that
who's the winner of that? Who's the winner of that discount? Are the Chinese refiners getting all of that discount, or is there middlemen taking a bigger chunk?
But they get a big share of that. Yeah, there are a lot of dealers, smugglers, the quota owners on Iranian side, the quota owners on Chinese side. There's a big chain of that, and the chain of the money deliveries to Iran has its own huge network, and it makes a big money for the ones who deliver the money to Iran, including the Chinese contractors, including exchanges. And as you know, big money the insurers make. Very small insurers make big money out of this. So Iran is not very happy at the current situation. There is also some internal struggle between the sellers of the oil, who are linked to top guys here or there, and the network which is delivering the money to the government and the central bank of Iran. And this fight continues because those ones who control this network can very directly impact the government. As you know, that the government and state in Iran are kind of different with each other. So this problem continues for Iran. The government in Iran is not in a good situation. Russian oil, there's more Russian oil in Chinese markets. Indians are kind of somehow considering slashing part of their Russian imports. So the risk on India has increased as well.
Asif, let's get Asif's voice in on this. Asif, your thoughts on where Washington is at from the point of view of Iran. Obviously, they participated very dramatically so at the end of the Israeli attack on Iran in June. But sanctions and the curtailing of oil exports, Trump's maximum pressure regime from his first time in office has not resurfaced. How do you think Washington is looking at that issue at this time?
Sanctions, we know that it's been there for a while, and it has been the main tool of the United States. Even the circumvention of sanction is something that United States has always been aware, right? So it's such a tool that it can tighten it whenever he wants or the Americans want. That's how it is. But you know, when the trade of oil happens, the destination always gets the oil. It's just the data that we don't get. Okay, in the gray market, the trade happens. The production has always been there. The Iranians have maintained, even throughout the sanctions, that they have been crossing 2 million mark in terms of their production, although the market doesn't have this data. So the market price of oil has been driven traditionally by OPEC's movement and, of course, the market sentiment. But now, increasingly, one has to look at the sanctions dynamics as to how it will impact the market. It's a major factor now. It's not just Iran. Now we have Venezuela, we have Russia. These are the three major segments of.
But on that point, we see the U.S. Very vocally in recent weeks putting pressure on India to stop importing Russian oil. Similarly, on China, the U.S. is talking about curtailing import of Russian oil. Obviously, a big military buildup of pressure around Venezuela, but Iran, not so much. They don't hear the barking, at least in public, about Iran or Iran exports. How do you interpret that?
Well, you have to look at the personality of Mr. Donald Trump. Although in the serious analysis, people generally miss that, but it's a very personal element in terms of United States relationship with Iran. It has been right from the beginning, Mr. Donald Trump's ambition to have a deal with Iran. He has been, if you look at it carefully, very, very diligently pursuing that. It's been a life, sort of life mission for him. So carrot and stick policy has been thoroughly applying. And you may not be surprised if within 2 years' time, he may as well clinch a deal. Now the scenario has been very ripe. We have been seeing Israeli-Iranian flag in memes, we can see those things happening. But the scenario is such where Mr. Donald Trump has been attempting to have some sort of deal with Iran, convincing Mr. Netanyahu that your primary concern has been met. We have enabled that to be met, right? So there has to be something there. So that is why Mr. Donald Trump has been slightly softer on, Iran rather than how much he is in terms of China.
The damage has been done to the main threat to the Zionists, the nuclear capabilities, and so they don't need to shout as much anymore. Okay, I get that. Let's go to the survey question today, which is sort of where we started our conversation. We do like little winners and losers sort of scenarios. But who's winning U.S. declared Liberation Day trade war on China after 6 months? We are at the 6-month anniversary. You have to ask these kinds of things. And we had the big summit yesterday. 1, Trump, 2, Xi, 3, tie so far. Tie in English means essentially it's evens. So who's winning U.S. declared trade war on China after 6 months? Trump, Xi, or it's a tie? Let's have a thought about that. It does seem to me, if there was one takeaway yesterday, of course it was a lot of theater, but I thought for the first time in my consciousness, and I was interested, as Asif was saying in his earlier comments, that Trump and has successfully embedded in the American citizen consciousness that China has been cheating or China's bad. In the same way that the U.S. spent 50 years saying the Soviet Union was bad, now China is the bad man and the boogeyman, and you've got to buy that. And that's certainly well worth it. But what I took away yesterday, I would say, is that for the first time, I actually saw China and the U.S. as equals. I've never quite grasped that in my head before. Obviously, we've been, all of us of an age, born and raised in the American empire, and Washington has always been the dominant power in our life. I think for the first time yesterday, that shifted for me. I crossed a particular conceptual, because these are things that are buried deep in your brain and your bias. For the first time, I saw an equal. Brian, that's sort of, by the way, just a shared comment on my part, but looking out to Sunday, we've got OPEC Plus meeting again to look at the future and their next month's policy. So it's the first Sunday of each month, i.e. first Sunday of November, this Sunday. And there is reports from Reuters and elsewhere that they may accelerate their supply increases like they did in the second quarter. They started with a month to month, and then they went boom, 3 months in 1 month. Your thoughts on that strategy coming now into this next phase? How would the markets, do you think, react to that? Is there appetite for that scale of supply increase?
I think if there's acceleration, it will have more downward pressure on the price. But honestly, the price has been pretty resilient. But OPEC needs to be really careful about that decision, in my view, because China is buying probably over 1 million barrels a day for their strategic petroleum reserve. That's not indefinite. That will come to a infrastructure constraint or an appetite constraint. And one of those two constraints will eliminate that market, which means that we'll quickly reduce our demand by 1 million barrels a day. And plus, we've seen rising inventories with oil on ships. So with some of these rising inventories in China, I think OPEC needs to balance. In other words, if they accelerate these quota releases, it's not really extra barrels, it's really quotas. We're really talking about quotas. And when you look at actuals versus quotas, you get into a different headspace. But when they do that, they may be setting themselves up to actually go the opposite direction into 2026 unless economic recovery starts to happen, which I think honestly is going to be a tough road. So I think they need to walk a very thin line. But I could see them do that because the price has been resilient even in their acceleration. So why not continue to go? I'm just expressing that hopefully they're peering into the future and seeing the China and oil inventories on the ship, because I think they need to be a little careful.
Daniel, your thoughts on the same thing? I mean, the new supply are coming in. Obviously, Iran is not party to these cuts or the return of these cut barrels. Does it matter, do you think, to Iran or to the other producers? Is there a market appetite there for these extra barrels from OPEC Plus?
Absolutely yes. Absolutely yes. Especially oil coming from Saudi Arabia and the UAE to China very much matters, together with the oil coming from Russia. It's really important for Iran that Iran, the Chinese market where Iran is selling its oil is into the teapots, the small refineries, mostly in Shandong. So the risk from the U.S. side on the Shandong's infrastructure, especially the ports and the tank farms, apart from the refineries themselves, is very much important for Iranian oil going to China. But the volume of oil, oil market is like a pool. Wherever you fill it, it comes up and the prices get balanced. So Iranian oil is very much affected by more barrels coming from the Persian Gulf region, Saudi Arabia and the UAE, and also at the same time, the more barrels coming from Russia. Much of the floating barrels, which Brian mentioned, is from Iran, and the big part of that is due to the longer distances that Russian barrels need to pass to get to Chinese and Indian market. So yes, it's very much important for Iran. The Kurdish oil, if it gets to the full scale, gets to the market, would matter very much. And in general, yes, the more barrels is one of the reasons that Iran is offering more discount at the moment. Iran needs to secure a level of exports to China, both to keep its actually customers and to maintain the flow of money and construction projects towards Iran.
Anybody else buying Iranian oil, or that's it? One customer?
No one else officially, even non-officially. At the end, all of the Iranian barrels ends up in China. Maybe
all
very
roads lead to Rome, so to speak.
And gets
the new Rome, of course.
Yeah, but
Asif,
the lion's share of that goes to China.
Asif, last word to you. I wanted to get your thoughts on OPEC Plus increasing supply or even accelerating the increase in supply, as reported by Reuters, may have a lot to do on whether you believe Trump's sanctions of the biggest Russian oil companies will actually this time have an impact in curtailing Russian oil exports. Your thoughts on those two things connected?
Yeah, absolutely. You're right. I totally agree with you. In addition to that, I must mention that, when the sanctions are implemented, a lot of oil that used to go to the various destinations by various countries, a lot of it is replaced by the American oil. Now, Americans
Sorry, say
are
that
not
again. Say that
a
again.
lot of oil is being replaced by the American oil. Okay, like before when the sanctions were there, during that time, entire Iranian oil to India was replaced by the American oil. Right, that is correct. Right. So now currently, US has been pumping more and more oil. So whenever there are sanctions, it is the US oil which replaces the oil that has been coming from the sanctioned country. Right. Now, United States is not a part of OPEC or OPEC Plus. So it is not the sole responsibility of OPEC or OPEC Plus to stabilize the market price of the oil. They understand this scenario. And US is the largest producer now, right? So it is not the similar situation what we used to have 10 years earlier. So whenever it is about accelerating the production, one must factor in this additional element that is there into play. The US is coming with a lot of oil in the market. So OPEC or OPEC Plus will have to fight with that scenario also. So that is why this scenario.
But it's also a very interesting thing that here's Chi. Wow, Chi's out there big time in this room. I don't know if that's a bias or not, but ultimately we'll put that on social media and see if the wider universe concurs with an overwhelming view like that. 0 for Mr. T. A lot will depend, I suppose, also in this sort of context of where we're going in Venezuela. If indeed we have an article I see just published as we were on air by Bloomberg, an interview with the Nobel Prize winning leader Maria Corina Machado, who is saying we're ready to take over government. I mean, what a headline at this particular moment as the Armada convenes offshore. And she's also saying that maybe force is necessary, says the Nobel Peace Prize winner. So maybe the Nobel group, if they couldn't give it to Trump, they gave it to the next best thing on his list. That's kind of an interesting development. But if indeed there is a change in government in Venezuela, and certainly that's what all the boats are pointing towards, that could change a lot with regards to the global oil markets and the global oil supply, because of course Venezuela has the world's largest oil proven reserves. At least that's what the data shows. Anyway, that's for tomorrow's headache. Now it's weekend time. Brian Pieri, it's now bedtime probably in the Rockies, but we thank you for staying up late. Asif Shuja with us here in Dubai, and Daniel Rahmat, of course, in beautiful Tehran. Thank you, guys. Have a great weekend. All the best. Bye-bye.
Thank
Bye-bye.
you.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye.